The ancient Egyptians developed philosophical, religious, and cultural ideas which enabled them to live in relative harmony with their land and with each other for over 3,000 years. These ideas were embodied in their art, architecture, and literature, much of which survives to enchant and guide us. Among these ideas is the concept of dualism, the idea that every person has both a body and a spirit. Both body and spirit required physical and spiritual necessities in everyday life and in the afterlife as well. Hence, art, architecture, and literature were essential to provide housing, sustenance, and spiritual guidance for the living, and for the Ka, the spiritual double, the divine energy which continues after the body's death, forever into the afterlife. Because the body and spirit were precious and eternal, the ancient Egyptians had a reverence for life, for nature, for the animals and plants which populated their land, and a unique respect for people in general. For example, women enjoyed a relatively high status in ancient Egypt. Subject to class, economic, and political conditions, property descended in the female line, and women could divorce, work in certain professions, and enjoy the privileges of the afterlife. There is no evidence for slavery in ancient Egypt until the later days of the empire or New Kingdom, when slaves were the spoils of war. The workers who built the pyramids were not slaves, but were drafted when they could not farm due to the annual flooding of the Nile. The Nile stretches from Central Africa northward to the Mediterranean. Its serene flow divides Egypt, located in the northeast corner of Africa, into two parts, east and west, a concrete physical basis for other dualities in Egyptian art and thought. The land on either side of the Nile, beyond the floodplain, is largely desert, which kept Egypt isolated from its neighbors and acutely conscious of the daily passage of the sun from east to west. Early on, cities developed on the east bank and cemeteries on the west, capturing the sun's movements in the actual structure of ordinary life. From about 3200 BC, a north-south division was evident in both art and life. The northern delta region was called Lower Egypt, and the southern area was known as Upper Egypt. Each was distinguished by different geographical features. Lower Egypt was a swampy delta area rich in papyrus, while Upper Egypt was more arid. The cobra, represented in art and hieroglyphic as the uraeus, a snake on a crown, symbolized Lower Egypt, personified as the goddess Wadjet or Hathor. The vulture symbolized Upper Egypt, personified as the goddess Nekhbet. These two ladies protected the pharaoh and signified his power. The pharaoh wore both a red crown of Lower Egypt and a white crown of Upper Egypt. Kingship united the two lands, Kemet, the Black Land, and Desret, the Red Land, or desert. As long as the climate remained moderate, the Nile overflowed on schedule, a powerful ruler held the throne, and Egypt was stable and life and culture flourished. From the unification under the pharaoh Narmer, about 3100 BC, until approximately 2200 BC, the Egyptians enjoyed the greatest serenity. The period from about 2700 to 2200 BC is called the Old Kingdom, or the Pyramid Age. Following the Old Kingdom, Egypt collapsed for roughly 100 to 200 years when an aristocratic elite began threatening the supreme authority of the pharaoh. This period is known as the First Intermediate Period. Pharaohs from Upper Egypt then re-established control in the Middle Kingdom, and this period seems to have been a self-conscious and uneasy time, or a time of spiritual questioning. During the Second Intermediate Period, invaders gained control, and once again southern pharaohs dominated, leading to the period known as the New Kingdom, or Empire, from about 1570 to 1000 BC. Each period is characterized by its own approaches to architecture, the visual arts, religious practice, and literature. In general, style becomes increasingly more naturalistic and more worldly. There is, however, a great deal of continuity in Egyptian art, owing to a canon of proportion in figure style and a consistency of purpose, providing for the needs of the Ka in the afterlife. After a third intermediate period, Egyptian pharaohs continued to rule, but with increasing threats from outside. The Hittites, and especially the Kushites, had been struggling for power all along. The Sea Peoples invaded, and in the 25th dynasty, Egypt was ruled from the land of Kush. Egypt was then conquered by the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. The spread of Christianity was felt in Egypt around 60 AD, and in 641 AD, the Arab conquest of Egypt gave the country yet another identity as a Muslim nation. The most striking feature of Egyptian art and architecture is a sense of the reverence for life. It has been wrongly said that the Egyptians were obsessed by death, since much of what they created is funerary. We know little about their everyday life, especially that of ordinary people, but their creations were made possible by their belief in eternal life. Life was so good, they wanted it to last forever. Egyptian art and architecture attempted to make the cosmic process of the sun's journey through the sky literal, in the land and in life. The pyramids and temples mapped this journey. The pharaoh was the incarnation of the sun god Horus, later called Ra in the Old Kingdom, and when he died to this world, he simply moved to the sky, joining the divine force in its journey. Recent theories which posit that the pyramids are beacons toward the stars are certainly right in capturing the psychological connection of the pharaoh to the sun. The pyramids point upward, but they also embody the sun on earth. This could be more visually understood if more of their outer cladding had not been removed. The outer stone casing of quartz-rich limestone reflected the abundant natural light in Egypt, making the pyramids appear to be made of gold. The pharaoh, a word deriving from Perah, or great house, was mighty, divine, and eternal. He was also described as a grasshopper, leaping skyward at death. At every opportunity, the ancient Egyptians saw similarities in nature to what they imagined happening on the vast cosmic level, as if to say that what is happening here, what exists in life, is the physical and earthly mirroring of what ultimately exists. Their universe was circular, focused on the wholeness of life and the interconnectedness of all things.